Pokrovsk is about to fall. It's just a matter of time. As you can see, Ukrainian soldiers are already starting to retreat. It reminds me of the battles of Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Every day it's getting worse for our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia. I mean, just look at the map. The entire Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad cauldron is collapsing in front of our eyes.
All hope is failing, my lord! The battle is almost done!
Like a tidal wave, Russian troops are attacking from all directions.
Here's Johnny!
Nah, just kidding, I'm playing with you. Because in reality, it's much worse than that. Half of Pokrovsk is already gone. According to the latest geolocations, this is the actual front line in Pokrovsk. Russian storm detachments are already fighting around the central train station, and the western exit has been closed off. Many Ukrainian units are already surrounded. There's no way to supply them, and there's nobody that can come rescue them. What a disaster! On the 20th of October, pro-Ukrainian media Meduza wrote, "The Battle of Pokrovsk. Russia is closing in on a key city in the Donetsk region. Can Ukraine hold the line?" Check out what this Ukrainian officer revealed to Ukrainskaya Pravda. Ukrainian infantry is practically cut off from command. We can hear them on the radio, and we try to deliver water to them with drones. They've been on the positions for 2.5 to 3 months. That's actually insane. The Ukrainian army went from 3-day rotations to 3 months. But that's not all. Another officer also admitted, things are unfolding according to the worst scenario. Pokrovsk is collapsing too fast. The last Ukrainian defenders of Pokrovsk can already hear Altai throat music all around them. As you can see, it's GG well played. With only one supply line left open, reports indicate that the general staff of the AFU is already withdrawing its forces from Myrnohrad to avoid a complete encirclement. The fun is over, time to pull out, or there will be long-lasting consequences. The Ukrainian command has to achieve this fast. If Pokrovsk falls first, Myrnohrad will be completely encircled, and up to 10,000 soldiers could be trapped. So in this video, we'll go through a step-by-step breakdown of this Battle of Pokrovsk, of this debacle, analyze how we got there and what it means next. Welcome to HistoryLegends, and here are the latest news of the Russia-Ukraine war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to support my work, make sure to turn off ad block or check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Okay, I'm warning you, this is gonna be a girthy update. Today we'll focus on this exact part of the front line, the Pokrovsk Cauldron. Disclaimer, we're going to use the Deep State UA map. I know. Despite its flaws, it's practical because it allows me to go back and forth in time and analyze things as a whole. So, as a guideline, most of the time, consider whatever is gray as red, Russian-controlled territory. And then 1 or 2 kilometers beyond that is the actual gray zone. Are you ready? Now let's talk about this massive Kesselschlacht. That was the frontline situation around the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad cauldron on September 1st. Russian forces held a 40-kilometer front, and as a result, the Ukrainian garrison was 3/4 encircled. From the Ukrainian perspective, the objective was to use these two urban areas as bulwarks and delay the Russian advance into the northern part of Donetsk Oblast for as long as possible. To break the deadlock in early August, the Russian command tried to outflank the Ukrainians with a strike on Dobropillia. But by September 1st, Russian progression had largely been stopped. The problem is that this map here is not accurate. Nobody understands what's going on, and because of that, some analysts that I will not name, the deserter, claimed countless Russian forces were encircled, that the salient was collapsing. Well, it proved to be completely false, because somehow that salient still holds. Magic! On September 1st, the Institute of the Study of War also reported how the Russian command reportedly redeployed elite naval infantry and airborne forces to Donetsk Oblast from northern Sumy Oblast and the Kherson direction, namely the 40th and 155th Marine Brigades plus the 11th and 76th Airborne Brigades. Typically, whenever these guys show up, it means Russia intends to deliver the coup de grâce, a crushing blow, and make a real dent in enemy lines. a bit like they did in Kursk. Take a mechanized column, давай вперед, and just shove it in, and then repeat until enemy line breaks. Now let's analyze the course of the operations day by day, so that you can understand everything what happened. On the 1st of September, east of Myrnohrad, a Russian armored vehicle disembarked some troops and was immobilized on its way back. While the Russians were attacking in this direction, Ukrainian rifle teams were even spotted moving in central Novoekonomichne, where they raised the yellow-blue flag. And the next day, a four-man team from the elite Skala regiment advanced southwest of Novoekonomichne. A couple hours later, Skala also launched a counterattack against Udachne, an important village sitting on the western side of Pokrovsk. In this footage, we can see this Ukrainian assault detachment advancing, while being supported by friendly firepower. Eventually, they make their way to this big building, where they ended up raising their colors.
We have captured a building, my lord!
Was this a real counterattack or just a PR stunt? I think you know the answer. In reality, the armed forces of Ukraine had lost the majority of the village of Udachne. That small village was extremely important. It was the key position that secured the right flank of the Ukrainian garrison in Pokrovsk. That same day, on the eastern edge of the Pokrovsk Cauldron, Russian infantrymen of the 3rd Battalion, 242nd Regiment raised their flag on the village of Poltavka. With this position secured, the next objective were the villages along the Mayak-Sofivka axis. As a matter of fact, the gray zone already expanded inside Volodymyrivka and 3 kilometers beyond Poltavka towards Shakhove. One key feature of the Ukraine war in 2025 is that the no man's land between Ukrainian positions and Russian ones is much larger. This means assault detachments have to push through much greater distances under enemy fire and FPV drones. Now something very strange happened 12 kilometers west of that same village of Poltavka. In this hamlet called Boykivka, we see 2 Russian soldiers with their rifles in hand. And to the right, we see a Ukrainian soldier walking about 115.32 meters in front of them. It doesn't seem like the Ukrainian soldier is captured because he also has his gun. And then they even chit-chat together. What's going on? Is the war over or something? In reality, the Ukrainian tricked the 2 Russians into thinking he was one of them. And once he was behind them, adios amigos, boom boom John Wick. When we see things like this, please tell me this is not some sort of civil war. 7 kilometers south from there, Ukrainian drones from the 14th Brigade Chervona Kalina targeted Russian infantry between Novoekonomichne and Myrnohrad. This is not any position, however, those are both industrial areas. If we zoom in, we can see what the area actually looks like. Here's a waste heap with some industrial buildings nearby, and then this huge coal plant. 1,000 meters in length, and which seem to have pretty impressive fortifications built around it. The irony is that since the AFU doesn't have riflemen anymore, these trench bastions are mostly empty, and in the end allow Russian infantrymen to find cover and hide from Ukrainian drones. Fun fact, this coal mine used to be named after Alexei Stakhanov, a Soviet coal miner who was promoted by the USSR in the 1930s as a model worker after allegedly breaking production records in Donbass. So even today, saying someone is a Stakhanovist means that person works extremely hard. Anyway, from this moment on, it was clear that Novoekonomichne had fallen. Yeah, perhaps the Ukrainians raised some of their flags, but just like in Udachne, those were simple PR stunts. In reality, Novoekonomichne was under Russian control. It was their hood now. To mark their territory, the Russians even started throwing red sneakers over the electric lines and shit. Overall, it also became clear how Russian forces were now converging on Myrnohrad from the east from these 3 directions. Myrnohrad is a city as big as Pokrovsk, so the defense of these 2 cities depends on one another. If one falls, the other falls as well. On the 4th of September, another strange event took place. About 8 Russian soldiers were captured by the elite Skala regiment at the center of this area marked as deep red. We all agree that this is Russian-controlled territory, right? Yet this event happened right next to that strange encounter between a Ukrainian soldier and the 2 Russians he tricked. This means Ukrainian detachments were active behind enemy lines. I'm looking at the map and I don't know what to make of this. To make the situation even more confusing, The next day, Ukrainian drones targeted enemy troops north of Shakhove. That means Russian forces were still active deep in that bulge. This bulge that already stretches over 11 kilometers. Like I often say, the bigger the bulge, the bigger the challenge. To make it simple, we'll just call this the Battle of the Bulge. Although because of Ukrainian counterattacks, it's quickly shrinking. I mean, what a turnoff, right? Now we move closer to Pokrovsk proper. Reportedly, Russian forces were advancing into Svirove, creeping their way towards the prized city inch by inch. At the same time, this is more or less where the front line stood since last July, so maybe the Russians just applied the story of the turtle against the rabbit a bit too much word for word. And then 10 kilometers from there, on the Ukrainian right flank in Udachne, Russian soldiers disguised as Nazgûls were targeted west of the settlement. In the video, we can see the riflemen advance across open fields, which means the Russian command intended to outflank enemy defenses from the south. So we established Russian presence here, but according to Ukrainian drone strikes, Russian forces were also in control of this area. Saying this area is under Russian control is a stretch. What I can say is that some Russian soldiers occupy this one building. Meanwhile, some Ukrainian soldiers occupy this one, 150 meters away. This is the building where the Ukrainians raised their colors a couple days before. And to make matters even more confusing, a Ukrainian rifle team was spotted running down a basement in the middle of Udachne. There's no clear line of defense, it's really a patchwork of defensive positions. On the 6th of September, a Russian mechanized column heading for Myrnohrad was intercepted and stopped 6 kilometers before reaching the city. A reported 5 vehicles were destroyed or abandoned. In this footage, we can see a drone targeting one of these MTLB troop transports. It was numbered 124, which could indicate that it belongs to the 5th Motor Rifle Brigade of the DPR. That's right, these damn Donbass coal miners are still active. What sort of trick are they going to pull this time? Anyway, this means Russian armored attacks are making a big comeback. So according to Ukrainian reports, this column got hammered. But then why did Deep State increase the gray zone by 1,500 meters all the way to these hangars outside Myrnohrad? Could it be that maybe Russian infantry was successfully disembarked, or that maybe other armored vehicles dropped off their infantry component without being intercepted? That's the thing in the age of drones. From a tactical perspective, it's often what you don't see that matters the most. If you're detected, it's over. You're gonna attract other drones. But if you're not, then you can pass through customs as if you had Nexus. On the 6th of September as well, from Svirove, Russian forces infiltrated into the first buildings of Pokrovsk. This means the battle for Pokrovsk had officially started. Meanwhile, supplying Pokrovsk became more and more difficult for Ukraine. MRAPs and pickup trucks going back and forth to bring reinforcements or supplies were getting hammered by Russian FPV drones, especially the ones with fiber optics. The ones that cannot get jammed. From the logistics hub of Hrishine, there were only 2 communication lines available to connect with Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. If any of these supply roads were cut, it's game over. However, resupplying the bulge was equally difficult for Russia. Enemy drones circled above the entire area 24/7, and with the rough terrain, sending vehicles was out of the question. Yes, even buggies, even motorcycles. Here's an example of what I mean. In this footage, you can see Russian motorcyclists driving past over 16 vehicles and another dozen motorcycles destroyed and abandoned. And this was only for this small stretch of the road north of Malinivka. The Russian command had no other choice but to return to 1914 and send individual soldiers to carry supplies to the front. Unfortunately for these men, they were spotted out in the open and targeted. However, to be fair, it's also the only video of that type that I could find. So that means that most soldiers bringing supplies can do so without being detected. Probably the troops that prefer to be camouflaged by the foliage in the greenery of summer. On the 7th of September, Deep State UA declared the defense forces of Ukraine cleared Volodymyrivka, pushed back the enemy near Razine. Okay, any visual confirmation to confirm your claims? No? Okay. Any sort of proof to back up your claim? No, neither? Okay. Forget about it, let's just redraw a map and make it seem as if Russians are the ones getting circled.
You just need to believe.
As the Russian bulge was getting squeezed like a barbell, on the 9th of September, Ukrainian bomber drones pummeled Russian forces in Shakhove. As a reminder, this village was officially marked as liberated by Deep State UA, although, to be honest, the eastern half is marked as part of the Gray Zone, aka Russian-controlled territory, and this is the area that the drones targeted. But still, this again confirms Russian presence deep inside the salient. 24 hours later, big territorial changes on the Deep State UA map. This was the frontline situation on the 9th of September, and this was the frontline one day later. Essentially, Ukrainian forces counterattacked into the Gray Zone and reclaimed contested territory that was definitely not Russian to begin with. How I interpret this is that a lot of these areas had no Ukrainian troops. And then the general staff of the AFU sent reinforcements towards Volodymyrivka and Shakhove. In a way, it was just to say, okay, we have troops there now. Meanwhile, the Russians formed a cauldron around it and pressed forward from these three directions. To support their push, Russian aviation dropped FAB bombs on these two settlements. Here you can witness the airstrike on Volodymyrivka and here the one on Shakhove. While this big back and forth was taking place in the bulge northeast of Pokrovsk, it's the western flank that started showing signs of exhaustion for the AFU. On the 11th of September, Russian forces raised their colors on Udachne. In this video, we can see the black hussars removing the Ukrainian flag from the rooftop, throwing it down while raising the white-blue-red banner nearby. The Battle of Udachne was finally over, but it was a difficult battle as well. As a reminder, Russian forces secured their first foothold in Udachne on the 15th of January. That's right, the 15th of January. Took them 8 months, day for day, to secure the settlement of 2 square kilometers. General Cauldron would be so proud of us. However, like we established before, this wasn't just any village. Whenever the Russians stepped forward, the Ukrainians counterattacked with force. Ultimately, this stubborn defense of Udachne by the Ukrainians prevented the Russian flanking maneuver of Pokrovsk from the west, which, as a reminder, was the original plan. By the 14th of September, Russian forces secured Shakhove and pushed deeper into Pokrovsk proper. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of the Cauldron, Russian infantry was targeted just outside Moskovsky, the settlement sitting south of Myrnohrad. This means the Russians were advancing along this tree line that they would use to concentrate their forces before the final assault on the village of Moskovsky. It's pretty much like siege warfare from the 17th and 18th centuries. The next day, in the north, heavy fighting was reported along the Volodymyrivka-Novotaretsky axis. While the drone operators of the elite Skala regiment harassed enemy riflemen in Novotaretsky, the Russians launched a lightning motorcycle attack against Volodymyrivka. Additionally, according to Deep State, Ukrainian forces made some gains in Pankivka. Once again, the mapping in this specific sector is atrocious. On the 16th of September, Russian forces advanced 400 meters inside Pokrovsk along Rossiyska Street. But that was only the tip of the iceberg because 24 hours later, Russian storm detachments were already spotted 950 meters beyond that last position. Although all these drone strikes were great victories for the AFU, somehow they kept getting closer and closer to the city's center of Pokrovsk. Actually, I lied. The situation was much worse than that. That same day, a Russian DRG was also spotted on the westernmost part of the city. In this footage, we can see 2 Ukrainian soldiers running along the main road when a Russian soldier hidden in the bushes opens fire at point blank. This is exactly what the shortage of riflemen means for Ukraine. The bigger the city, the harder it is to actually defend. This is why when people cope by saying such and such city is too big for Russia to take, this just proves they don't understand what's actually happening on the ground. The pressure once again increased on Pokrovsk on the 20th of September as multiple Russian attacks were reported. There was this 1,200-meter push from Shakhove inside Pokrovsk along Privolna Street. The area south of Chunishine fell into Russian hands, and according to Deep State, more Russian rifle teams poured into the northern part of Novoekonomichne. But like we established before, this is just some cope. The important thing to understand is that the Russians were concentrating a lot of forces in Novoekonomichne for this assault on Myrnohrad. That explains why the very next day, Ukrainian MiG-29s dropped heavy loads on Russian positions east of Myrnohrad. In this one, you can see a GBU-62 airstrike on the coal factory sitting between Novoekonomichne and Myrnohrad. Fearing multiple shots on goal, this Russian soldier desperately tried to get cover by jumping into a nearby building. Moments later, it was the turn of Ukrainian artillery to bombard the same position. Such industrial areas are like fortresses because they were made to sustain atomic bombs. If Ukraine cannot contain the Russians to this factory, then the Russians will be able to brute force their way for real into Myrnohrad. Also on the 21st of September, Deep State UA conceded another 200 meters along Privolna Street, a road that leads right into the center of Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, Ukraine's 68th Yega Brigade targeted Russian DRGs inside the residential sector south of Pokrovsk along the TO5-15 road. If the situation could not get worse, Pokrovsk was also getting outflanked from the southeast, as an increasing number of Ukrainian drone strikes were reported against the hamlet of Chunichine, but also against Novopavlivka. Here you can get a panoramic view of these settlements. It's all spaced out residential buildings. Russian soldiers can just hop from one house to another, and it's very hard to defend without boots on the ground. The Battle of the Bulge was quickly turning into a nightmare for Russia. On the 23rd of September, a Russian motorcycle squad was ambushed by Skala in Novotaretsky. But that's not all, the Russians got clapped there a second time.
Oh shit, here we go again.
In this video, a squad of 8 Russian riflemen is walking in a file, when all of a sudden, they receive fire from the ruins. The Russians immediately scattered to the right after suffering some losses. However, the video is cut in a specific way that makes it unclear what actually happened and how many casualties the Russians actually suffered. And then Ukraine's most brilliant 69th Desktop Brigade just slaps 200 on this blurry footage, and they call it a day. As you can imagine, nobody really knows what's going on there. A bit like the port of Montreal, a real black hole. The battle for Myrnohrad took a sharp turn on the 26th of September. Russian patrols were halted by Ukrainian drones only 500 meters from the first houses of the city. Meanwhile, it's only the next day, on the 27th, that Deep State UA acknowledged the loss of Udachne, 2 weeks after the Russians had raised their colors. Also on the 27th, Russian troops, some of which aboard buggies, were targeted right inside Dorozhne. Hold on a second, Dorozhne sits 2 kilometers beyond what Deep State considers Russian territory. Something doesn't add up. I think this entire area is actually under Russian control. On the 28th of September, Deep State UA augmented the gray zone both south of Pokrovsk and north of Myrnohrad. It was a real Kesselschlacht and the Cauldron was tightening. Ukraine only had a 9-kilometer breathing room between the two tips. And you all know the golden rule of warfare. October 2025. On October 1st, the Ukrainians launched counterattacks in Nowy Shakhove, combined with similar offensive actions west of Kucherev Yar. Other than that, the Russian bulge held. Actually, hold on, let me check my notes. Oh yeah, another strange incident happened. Can you guess where? That's right, Novotaretsky. Here we have a 2-man Russian patrol advancing under the cover of these trees. But then the point man hits a mine. Actually, no, somehow he survives and runs back into the woods, leaving his buddy alone at the front. Unfortunately for the runner, another 2-man team shows up right after and mistakenly shoots him. The original post on Twitter said he was shot for retreating, but this is so dishonest. You just have to watch the video to see that this is a clear case of friendly fire. Further south, Deep State UA acknowledged Russian gains east of Moskovsky. This means with their left flank covered, they advanced past this tree line across open field and secured this power station 3 kilometers away, which could then be used as a stepping stone to storm Moskovsky. As a result, some Ukrainian troops accidentally found themselves behind enemy lines, like these guys holding on to this tree line between the power station and Mirolyubivka. Unfortunately for some of them, their journey ended here. They will not be advancing to the next round. Meanwhile, French-made Caesar self-propelled howitzers from the Ukrainian 155th Mechanized Brigade pummeled all the approaches to Pokrovsk. One of their drones even recorded the heavy cost in military equipment for the Russians over the past months, with a total of 47 vehicles abandoned on one of the main roads leading to Pokrovsk. Equally, Russian artillery bombarded Ukrainian strongholds in Novopavlivka. Despite the presence of so many FPV drones, Sometimes you just need that firepower. Artillery is still essential to punch holes and blow up enemy bastions. It can deliver much bigger payloads at a longer range, much faster. I think this relationship between artillery and drones should really be studied. Could be the topic of another video. On the 3rd of October, more and more Russian riflemen were advancing into Krasny Liman, as well as east of Rodinske. By the way, the only reason Rodinske managed to hold is because of the number of Russian resources that were sent to sustain the Battle of the Bulge. As a reminder, Rodinske is this bastion that protects this northern supply line going from Udachne to Myrnohrad. Okay, but now pay attention to this video. We see a Russian rifleman by himself walking by an abandoned trench network. We can even see an entire row of barbed wire at the rear. This led me to ask myself some questions. What fortifications are the best against drones? All these fancy trench bastions were ideal for a war involving direct fire, but in a way they're now obsolete in the age of drones. Now back to the main story. And we can also believe that the Ukrainians sent a lot of reinforcements towards Rodinske to hold that very critical position. In turn, the Russians decided to bypass it from the south via Krasny Liman. That same day, Russian artillery launched an impressive storm of steel on Pokrovsk. The first one along Privolna Street. We even see 3 Ukrainian soldiers quickly relocating towards another position, and another bombardment targeted the high-rise building district east of the city. As you can observe, most of them are 5 to 6 story buildings. Hold on, what is it that I see there?
A unit is running from the battlefield!
As you can see, countless Ukrainian units started flocking back northwards to avoid being trapped by the advancing Russian forces. Back in the Bulge, the 225th Assault Regiment reported Russian activity in the village of Mayak. Meanwhile, in Novotaretsky, a Ukrainian drone recorded an entire field filled with Russian fatalities. Obviously, I can't show you the images. First of all, it's alleged Russian casualties. We're not really sure, but anyway, I counted about 40 KIA. It's massive, and many of them were grouped up. It's very rare nowadays, so I don't really understand what happened. I don't even know in what time frame that happened. Was it in days or multiple weeks? But then there's footage like this one, where the drone operators of Skala are terrorizing Russian infantry squads in that same village. And as you can see, they seem to be grouped up right before the strike. The only explanation to me about all these events in Novotaretsky is that Ukrainians planted and infiltrated small teams, like some sort of long-range reconnaissance, that see everything that's happening, whose role is to set up ambushes, but above all to provide extremely precise intel for the drone strikes. Meanwhile, Ukraine's 69th Desktop Brigade deployed in Lviv made this cool edit, but it backfired hard, because it just showed how Russian troops were in control of the settlement of Vilne. The salient is much girthier than expected. This is the actual front line. On the 4th of October, Russian storm detachments continued their progression along the rail embankment north of Chunishine. In this footage, we can see Ukrainian drones pounding their former bunkers and trench networks. Now if we look on the westernmost end of the map, on the 8th of October, Ukraine's 3rd Special Operations Center targeted Russian forces that had infiltrated the mining complex 1.5 kilometers north of Udachne. Not only did this confirm the loss of Udachne, but simultaneously Russian patrols reached Molodetske, the small village located at the border with Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. I guess it's time to download this new DLC map. Should be ready for the next episode. Surprisingly, the Ukrainian Air Force was very active over the sky of Pokrovsk, because that same day launched an airstrike on Krasny Liman as well as on Malinivka against a Russian artillery position. At that moment, the Russian battle plan was to storm Volodymyrivka and Shakhove using brute force mechanized assaults and thus secure the right flank of the Bulge. That was the only way to bring infantry units as fast as possible into these villages and secure these positions. And these objectives had to be conquered before the units in the Bulge gave in. Okay, now that we're warmed up, let's talk about what happened on the 9th of October. Let's just say it wasn't the most glorious day in Russian military history. From the settlement of Popy-Vyar, the Russians launched a major mechanized assault in the direction of Volodymyrivka that involved, wait for it, It reported 35 armored vehicles and 40 motorcycles. It's absolutely huge. It's been a long time we haven't seen such an armored assault from the Russian armed forces. For example, this column here alone was composed of 7 BMPs. Here we see one armored vehicle approaching this group of 3 units with smoke rising from one of them. Had they been destroyed and immobilized? Had they already dropped off their infantry? In this video, you can get the perspective of the FPV drones that hunted down the Russian armored vehicles. It looked like a real turkey shoot. However, contrary to the first impression, this Russian attack wasn't as big as a fiasco as it seems. For example, here we see a column turning around. This 100% means they dropped off the infantry and they're going back to base. Mission was accomplished. And this was geolocated on this tree line right here, very close to the actual objective. In this footage, we see a bunch of armored vehicles stopped in front of a bridge. Yeah, maybe they do get pounded there, but this is the bridge located between Shakhove and Volodymyrivka. Meanwhile, multiple troop transports were able to disembark their infantry component right into the village of Volodymyrivka. It's in this southern part of the village that the Russians managed to gain a foothold. And it's not as if I'm making this up, we have the Ukrainians providing us with all the visual evidence. And the elephant in the room, Russia suddenly has armored vehicles again. That attack in big columns. It's weird, I thought Russia had run out of armored vehicles. Look, it was a tactical victory for Ukraine. They also got their PR win with all these Russian vehicles being destroyed. But starting on the 10th of October, the dream started collapsing. Because around the same time, it's Ukrainian vehicles that were getting clapped. There was an entire steel graveyard filled with 16 to 22 armored vehicles and pickup trucks on the intersection linking Udachne to Myrnohrad. If you're interested, I made an entire video about it. Essentially, this didn't happen in one day. This is the result of weeks of supply runs and rotations being targeted by Russian drones. The problem for the AFU is that by losing all these vehicles, this means longer rotations for the infantry, which then exhaust the riflemen sitting in the trenches, but it also means less medevacs. In terms of territorial gains, Deep State UA acknowledged Russian control over Nikhanorivka. What did I tell you? This is the only thing that makes sense, considering Russian storm detachments were already fighting in Dorozhne. Talking about this, Dorozhne is actually a very important objective. I mean, okay, it's not a big place. It's only a train station and 10 houses. But from there, Russian forces could completely outflank the AFU and ravage their rears, namely by using this rail embankment. So at the moment for Ukraine, it is of the utmost importance to hold this rail embankment going from Dorozhne all the way to Rodinske. But simply they have to hold this 7-kilometer line at all costs. But looking at the map and the little progress the Russians have made in this direction means the general staff of the AFU is well aware of the importance of the sector. Now if we look to the western side of Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians also unhooked their forces from Kotline. Meanwhile, Russian forces gained some more ground southwest of Pokrovsk. And on the 11th of October, Russian DRGs started infiltrating Myrnohrad from the north, in the sector of Krasny Liman. 24 hours later, Deep State UA was ordered to change the map. They got new intel from the front line. Allegedly, Ukrainian forces counterattacked all around the salient, like in Dorozhne, but also everywhere in the so-called gray zone.
You just need to believe.
Meanwhile, the 3rd Battalion of the Ukrainian 92nd Assault Brigade targeted Russian infantry on the outskirts of Rodinske. On the 13th of October, the Russians launched a small mechanized attack on Myrnohrad. For once the footage is not cut, we have the premium account with a full-length video, so we can actually analyze what's happening step by step. We see a Russian MTLB troop transport driving past the power station we mentioned earlier. Then an artillery round missed the MTLB as it drove into the trees. Suddenly we see an infantryman running around, probably a friendly. Seconds later, an ATGM comes crashing in, but missed the vehicle. The MTLB then drove a bit in circles, dodging more artillery rounds. Eventually it drives along this road and disembarks everyone in a hurry. All the riflemen inside then disappear into the trees. This happened right here east of Myrnohrad. You can see the exact trajectory of the MTLB before dropping off its infantry component. This also means this entire area is now under Russian control. This was also confirmed by the following footage by Ukrainian Paladin self-propelled howitzer, which shelled this exact area on the same day. So while some units sent armored vehicles one by one, the Russian officers in charge of the Battle of the Bulge had the brilliant idea of launching yet another mass attack of armored vehicles. With a reported 17 APCs and 1 tank, the column suffered significant material losses in Fedorivka but mostly outside Shakhove. According to Ukrainian footage, a first BMP-3 is immobilized by a mine. Because of that, the vehicles behind are quickly disembarking their infantry component. Suddenly they're targeted by an intensive artillery barrage, and then FPV drones start raining on the remaining vehicles of the column one by one. But it seems that all the Russian vehicles still managed to drop off the riflemen they were transporting. That means in theory about 80 soldiers were brought right on the contact line. From an operational perspective, instead of attacking Shakhove from the south like 3 days earlier, this time around Russian columns maneuvered and attacked the village from the exposed eastern flank. And this allowed numerous Russian infantry teams to disembark right on the outskirts of Shakhove. Despite these tactical wins for Ukraine, yes, it's impressive to destroy dozens of vehicles, but the elite Russian regiments are clearly making a dent in the front line. The situation is critical because these villages are all located one behind another. If one of these falls, they all fall. On the 15th of October, Deep State UA once again shrunk the Russian area of control around Kucherev Yar. At this point, I don't even know if these are just PR stunts, so that some analysts can make random videos about it and buy new cars in Switzerland, or if this is the actual situation on the front line. Further to the south, Ukrainian artillery bombarded the settlement of Sukhetske. This probably means Russian assault detachments are concentrating here to break through the railway line north of Rodinske once and for all. And now near Pokrovsk, the Russian 55th Motor Rifle Brigade announced the full capture of the settlement of Novopavlivka. But of course, Deep State UA cannot possibly show that. Somehow they need more confirmation. Maybe we'll get it in 2 weeks. Now let's talk about the cursed village of Novotaretske. Blyat, I swear, this village will be eradicated like the kulaks! Now we understand why Russian casualties were so high in this village. It was revealed that the Ukrainians kept dropping anti-personnel mines using their quadcopters. So Russian motorcyclists or infantry squads advanced in territory they thought that was already demined and safe. And that's when they got wrecked. It's also the last time in this report that we'll talk about Novotaretske. This most likely means the Ukrainian forces hiding in the settlement and in this entire area were finally ordered to withdraw. Because of all these armored assaults against Shakhove and Volodymyrivka, on the 16th of October at 11 a.m., the Russian army launched another mechanized assault. In this footage, you can see the number of APCs that were involved in this one push. 5 vehicles on the move in this column, 8 vehicles back to back in this one. Surprise, surprise, the columns were moving northwards towards Popivyar and then assault Ukrainian positions in Shakhove, with an estimated 100 infantrymen aboard. However, this armada was intercepted, and as a result, about 20 armored vehicles were destroyed or immobilized between that highway intersection and the settlement of Popivyar. That was a real debacle. The vehicles got hammered kilometers before even reaching the contact line. Even HIMARS were used to lit up one of these columns. HIMARS! Hold on, that means that within exactly 1 week, the Russians lost up to 75 armored vehicles destroyed or immobilized. This is absolute madness. Okay, I was a bit lazy at that moment, but I fact-checked Ukraine's official numbers, and I counted exactly 46 Russian armored vehicles that were destroyed or abandoned in these 3 attacks. It's 50% lower than the official numbers, but obviously it's still massive. We can explain this because Ukrainian drones were able to fly right above these columns and observed everything. They coordinated artillery strikes and guided all the FPV drones straight to their targets. From a tactical perspective, this means the Russians don't control the sky over the bulge. However, if the Russian command is ready to sacrifice dozens upon dozens of armored vehicles, it also means this push is extremely important. They probably think that this is the only way to bring a critical mass of infantrymen to secure these villages. Think about it, 70 armored vehicles with an average of 5 soldiers inside. That's 350 soldiers brought to the contact line. During these attacks, the Russians did sacrifice their armored vehicles, but at least the infantry was able to push further. Doing this using infantry infiltrations would take forever. And with so many hostile drones in the area, it would just lead to unacceptable casualties. On the 17th of October, Deep State UA finally acknowledged Russian gains southwest of Pokrovsk. Heavy fighting was taking place in the Komi Block district, which Russian artillery pummeled relentlessly. But then, the attack drone company Hornets of Dovbush from the 68th Yega Brigade started buzzing over residential buildings and bunkers where they thought Russian soldiers were hiding. However, as you can see, those were not multi-level buildings. These strikes didn't happen in that high-rise district. That's because Russian infantry actually managed to infiltrate the westernmost edge of Pokrovsk. And as a result, this means this vital supply line was officially cut off. Do you understand how disastrous this is? This road is now the only lifeline of the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad garrison. This one road with the intersection of death. It's actually much worse than that. A Ukrainian soldier was ambushed by a Russian DRG right here on the map. And then another 2 Ukrainian soldiers were also ambushed right at the center of Pokrovsk. At the same location, a Ukrainian infantry squad was also ambushed, tracked down, and annihilated by Russian drones. In the end, the last 2 survivors of that group pleaded for their lives to the drone operators to be allowed to surrender. What's going on? The city's falling apart faster than Baghdad fell to the Mongols. Meanwhile, to the east, Myrnohrad was also suffering from very intense artillery shelling by M-S self-propelled howitzers and Tornado G MRLS systems. North of that city, Russian infantry squads were silently creeping their way forward. It's only on the 19th of October that Deep State UA admitted Russian gains east of Myrnohrad, but as always, it immediately got worse. The artillery of Ukraine's 38th Marine Brigade annihilated an entire residential sector, but that took place inside Myrnohrad proper. To the west, with the fall of Udachne, the fighting had now completely shifted for the mining complex. There, a video released on the 20th of October showed Ukrainian special ops storming the industrial facility, and as a result, they captured an enemy infantryman. These lightning strikes prevented the right flank from giving in, but it was right at the center, in Pokrovsk, that the AFU was losing control. All the drone strikes they published kept getting geolocated more and more to the north. That's why Deep State UA had no other choice but to show Russian presence near the central train station. But that's not all. All of a sudden, Ukrainian drones also targeted this industrial sector at the northwestern exit of the city. GG well played. The AFU had barely time to recover that on the very next day. The 38th Marine Brigade intercepted a Russian armored column south of Myrnohrad. However, during the attack, it became clear that the Russians managed to pass the village of Promin and gained a foothold in the southeastern edge of Myrnohrad. This is extremely important considering that some of their patrols have already been spotted 2 kilometers to the north. And then it's in the settlement of Barahan that Russian forces were reported. This means the real front line must lay somewhere along this line. Myrnohrad was getting squeezed from every direction. If in the north of Myrnohrad positions were more or less stable, all the positions in the south were giving in. There was barely any resistance. Now to the north, at the tip of the Battle of the Bulge, Deep State UA announced more Ukrainian gains, with the village of Kucherov Yar taken into a pincer from both the west and the east. However, it's Ukraine that will get the upper hand, because 24 hours later, Ukraine's 132nd Recon Battalion stormed Kucherov Yar and thus was able to raise their yellow-blue flag on the settlement. Additionally, 4 Russian soldiers were also taken prisoner. It was very important for Ukraine to stop Russian progression and prevent them from outflanking the entire Ukrainian battle line. So as a whole, the Russians were making gains in Udachne, they were making gains in Pokrovsk, they were making gains south of Myrnohrad to the east, and they were advancing towards Shakhove. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Ukrainians held the front line between Dorozhny and Rodinske and also managed to stabilize the situation north of the Bulge. On the 22nd of October, west of Pokrovsk, troops from the 27th Motor Rifle Division raised the white-blue-red flag on the village of Molodietske. This village sitting at the border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts. Meanwhile, in Pokrovsk, the situation deteriorated once more on the 23rd of October. Russian infantry was suddenly spotted east of the high-rise district, and other patrols were detected north of the train station. Everything was collapsing. Turns out 250 Russian soldiers managed to infiltrate Pokrovsk. At least, probably more. The Russians learned from their past mistakes during the summer, and now they're back in strength. As of now, they formed this patchwork of areas of control, like oil stains. And as a result, countless Ukrainian units are now effectively surrounded. I don't know how they're gonna get out of there. The nightmare was confirmed the next day when Ukraine's Skala regiment spotted more Russian infantry on the western end of the city, as well as right at the center of Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, Russian aviation was fabbing the northeastern parts of Pokrovsk. And then it's Russian storm detachments that called a touchdown on the western edge of Rodinske. Within a matter of days, everything was falling apart. And now, according to the latest news, on the 25th of October, the Russian command launched another mechanized assault to flank Volodymyrivka from the west. Although 6 armored vehicles were lost along the river, this push consolidated Russian presence south of the village. Meanwhile, west of the Bulge, Ukrainian storm detachments stormed and recaptured Sukhetske. This allowed the 3rd Battalion of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade to raise its colors on the settlement and take home a couple Russian prisoners. The next day, on the 26th of October, a large concentration of Russian infantry units were targeted while moving northwards towards Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, in the Bulge, although Deep State marked Nove Shakhove as blue, a fire team of the 47th Mechanized Brigade engaged in a firefight right at the center of the village. With the capture, they reported 7 Russian soldiers from a basement. And just 10 kilometers to the south, the storm unit of the Russian 9th Brigade raised its colors on Rodinske. It would have been an incredible achievement, but 24 hours later, a Ukrainian BTR of the Jaguar Battalion of the 14th Chervona Kalina Brigade counterattacked and unleashed hell at Russian soldiers occupying this apartment block. This means Rodinske is still contested, but the Russian forces coming from Krasny Liman could soon get the upper hand. At last, just like a crazy ex, the Russians can't let go of Shakhove. They launched another armored assault involving 29 vehicles. Once again, these columns faced the wrath of Ukrainian FPV drones. As a result, 10 APCs and a tank were left behind. However, this allowed Russian assault units to increase the pressure on the eastern side of Shakhove, push further inside Volodymyrivka, and secure a foothold inside Pankivka. Although they're paying a heavy price, the elite Russian marine and airborne units are indeed starting to make a real dent in the Ukrainian lines. And it's just a matter of time before the fall of these settlements. In conclusion, in the past 2 months, the Ukrainian command successfully reduced the Russian bulge north of Pokrovsk, all the while preventing the Russians from securing Shakhove. And this despite considerable Russian reinforcements sent to that sector. In the end, while the Russian army is applying pressure on Myrnohrad from all directions, Russian rifle teams are swarming Pokrovsk from the inside. They're pushing in the center, west, east, everything is falling apart. The entire south of Pokrovsk is essentially gone. A Ukrainian officer said, "Pokrovsk is collapsing too fast. We didn't expect this." The supply road is already cut off due to Russian presence in the western outskirts. Only remains this supply line, the road of death, with this intersection under high surveillance of Russian drones. Not only that, Russian forces are allegedly less than 1,000 meters away from that vital intersection. If they capture it, Myrnohrad will be effectively isolated. So, what can we expect next? Well, option 1, the general staff of the AFU decides to double down and bring more forces into the Cauldron, not one step back. Or number 2, they already prepared the withdrawal from the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad Cauldron. Retreating is always a difficult maneuver. One misstep and it can turn into a rout. We can expect this retrograde maneuver to be done step by step, with the southern part of the Cauldron to be evacuated first, including the south of Myrnohrad. Any units still there will have to be redeployed north along this line. Knowing the AFU, they will try to hold this new line as long as possible. Meanwhile, we can expect the Russian command to redeploy all available reserves towards Pokrovsk. Give everything they have and just break through once and for all. They could do this no matter the cost, because by taking Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad will be effectively encircled. There will be nowhere out. Of course, to avoid such a nightmare scenario, the AFU might redeploy some elite units like Azov to momentarily counterattack, just to hold the door open wide enough for everyone to withdraw in good order. Just like they did in Bakhmut, in Avdiivka. However, the collapse of Rudinsky could disrupt all these plans, accelerate the fall of Pokrovsk, and turn this entire withdrawal into a rout. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.